Our talk title this morning is Make a U-Turn. We are talking about complaints, complainers, and how to make the U-turn before walking into the den of lions. And probably most of us can relate to that, whether it's either recognizing that we've been complaining and suddenly feeling lowly, or whether it's recognizing that we've been around someone who seems to constantly complain. Either way, kind of sucks the energy right out of us. This talk is based on writing from Emma Curtis Hopkins that David found, in which she wrote, "Complaining and whining are only exhibitions of great desert spots in your character." Now, it goes on, but I just really had to address that because from everything I've heard of Emma Curtis Hopkins, if you went to a counseling session with her and sat there and started telling her all the complaints that you have, that's exactly what she would say to you. And I don't know about you, but most of the counselors I know are like, "Oh, sweetheart, I totally understand." And so you get to stay in that lull of understanding. And it does not promote a lot of growth. So, complaining and whining are only exhibitions of great desert spots in your character. You must fill up deserts with rain and fertilizer. So you must transform your moments of complaining by praise and descriptions of the good in the universe. Kind of mimicking what Frank just talked to us about. She goes on to say, the desert has not had rain enough, so you have not charity or mercy enough if you feel like complaining. If things in your past have made you feel sad and hard, you must say, the good they have done you makes you thankful. Give great thanks. Woo. All great advice, isn't it? In Science of Mind, we might say, when you complain and blame, you affirm the existence of limitation, instead of persevering beyond them and embracing opportunity and possibility. And opportunity and possibility is everywhere present in every given moment for each and every one of us to take what we will.
And complaining and whining are perpetuating that which we do not wish to experience. We keep the unpleasant effects of life alive and festering by constantly affirming them, as Deborah said, when we constantly hold them in consciousness and constantly obsess over them. Emma Curtis Hopkins uses this phrase, you must fill up deserts with rain and fertilizer. Well, I often have felt like I'm up to my ears in fertilizer, but not the positive, life-affirming, growth-promoting type that Hopkins is referring to. When we experience moments of deep fertilizer, we often feel a nagging need to let others know how miserable we are. And, because misery loves company. And in so doing, we're pulling our friends into that pit of fertilizer along with us, so that they can get the full extent of what we're suffering. And here's the thing, if they're truly your friends, why would you want them to feel that way? Why would you want to share that with them? The fertilizer Hopkins is actually referring to as turning the bad experience around and infusing the experience with positive energy. Rather than dwelling on negative aspects, we fill the desert with positive energy. When we find ourselves in a hole, we stop digging, we climb out, and we move on into the good life.
Because we know that that hole is not where we want to be. And I love your innuendo about the fertilizer. So,
fertilizer happens.
There is a gentleman by the name of Steve Leonard. I don't know him, but he's a speaker and a writer, and he was a senior military strategist. And he shares 4 types of complaints and 4 varieties of complainers that I found pretty interesting to look at. And so as we look at these, think about which words may resonate with you and which ideas you may have great resistance to. Oh, I'm definitely not that, I don't do that, because those things we resist persist. And so those are probably the areas we do want to look at. He says that the 4 types of complaints are productive, venting, chronic, and malicious. And he also talks about how leaders need to identify and respond properly to complaints that are made in an effort to limit negative fallout. So as leaders in the world, regardless of it, it's in our household, with our friends, in our career, whatever it is, wherever it is, as leaders, we want to gain the wisdom to be able to deal with any complaints that come our way in a way that is productive, that creates more good in the world. So the 4 ways, he says productivity or productive complaints they highlight the problem and at the same time they offer a solution. He says that they're valuable in providing feedback and discussions, and that they drive necessary change. So we know that the one thing that is always permanent is change. And I have to say that my principal at my school is an absolutely fabulous leader. Whenever you ever go to her with any kind of a complaint or a challenge, she says, "And what is your solution?" And if you don't have one, you can go back and think about it and come to me again tomorrow. So within ourselves, we can utilize that same strategy. He talks about productive complaints, and those, oops, I just said that one, not moving my thing along here. Venting complaints. The intent is more about releasing stress and frustration from the person. And they're typically focused on issues that are actually outside of the complainer's control anyway. And so they're just venting to release their own frustration within a situation. And recognizing that as a human being or as a leader, as a co-leader in our lives, can be very beneficial. The next one is the chronic complainer. Now, this kind of person is usually not ever happy anyway, and they often sap the energy right out of you or a group even. They have that much power, and they do it in an effort to draw attention to themselves. So if you are working with a chronic complainer who has chronic complaints, then you might want to look for what is the underlying cause of the problem and work toward bringing that into awareness in the group or within the relationship. Then there's the malicious complaint. This is the most damaging of all because its intent is to be destructive, to undermine others. And we often think of this kind of complaint as gossip or backstabbing, but it's a malicious complaint. When he talks about the 4 varieties of complainers, he includes aggressive, expressive, passive, and constructive. The aggressive complainer is usually very loud, in my opinion, quite angry, and to anyone and everyone. If you even get in their way, you're going to get a piece of it, regardless of whether you even did anything or even know what's even going on. And the aggressive complainer tends to dismiss any idea of a solution or a resolution. No matter how many ideas you bring to them, nothing is quite good enough. There's always a yeah, but. So that person, it tends to be quite controlling and often overly emotional. And then there's the expressive complainer. And this kind of a complainer usually does so publicly and often in this day and age on social media. This person will engage in a dialogue, so it is possible to have the discussion with this kind of complainer in a way to enable them to open up to see the big picture and get on board once they listen to working towards solving the solution, finding the solution and solving the challenge. Then we have the passive complainer, which he says is perhaps the most destructive kind of complainer of all, because they are indirectly confrontational. They will share with everyone else on the planet except the one person who they have the complaint or who could actually make the change. And so this kind of complainer sows seeds of discontent. And because they are not direct, they rarely get solutions. Then they have the constructive complainer. This kind of person is usually deeply introspective. They think within before they come out. Perhaps they use treatment, although he didn't say that, but I'm saying that. They go first within to treatment and then determine what is the best path forward. They are extremely organized and they are critical, but this criticalness comes off as a critique and is invaluable in an organization. They provide productive feedback and talk through to find resolution, and when resolution is found, they act decisively in accordance with the agreement. So you can see that when dealing with complainers, we need a lot of patience. We need a lot of loving kindness. And complainers tend to be impatient themselves, which means you even have to have a greater amount of patience to overcome the impatience and to be willing to sit in the silence with it. So whether you find that you may be a complainer or whether you deal with complaints, it's always best to deal with the issues as quickly and as decisively as possible. Don't let them linger, don't let them fester, and don't let them grow.
Well, here's a reason, or maybe a way to see the bigger picture, as Deborah's talking about, and confidently move above the level of challenges. And one of those things is just recognizing the truth of who and what you are. Thomas Troward says, what you really are, in essence, is a concentration of the one universal life into conscious individuality. We are God expressing as individuals, in other words. He says, if you live from the recognition of this truth as your starting point, it makes you free. You cannot do this so long as you imagine that you have one center and the infinite another center. You can only do it by recognizing that the two centers coincide and that which as being infinite is incapable of centralizing itself finds center in you. That's kind of twisty a little bit, but let me explain that. I think it's pretty fascinating. We only find the center of something by finding the opposite ends and cutting it in half and finding the center in the middle. But if something is infinite, there is no beginning or ending. So there are no two ends. So anything that is infinite must find its center at any point within its being. Kind of challenging, isn't it? And since it can find its full center at any point, you, being expression of the infinite, are one of those centers. You are the full expression of spirit showing up as you. It's like a Venn diagram where we have one circle over here representing all that God is and one circle over here representing all that we are. And we bump those two together until we have that little intersection in the Venn diagram. And that's all the parts of us that are God. And quite often we see ourselves maybe even totally separate from. But when we bump ourselves together, we think, well, yeah, I can feel a little bit of God in me because I know God is all that is, and so therefore God is all I am. So that makes us really slide those circles a little bit closer together so that intersection piece in the beginning, in the middle, becomes a little bit bigger and stronger. We recognize our spiritual nature and our oneness with Spirit to the extent that we actually feel more and more of that essence of God within us. We increase our level of gratitude by increasing our awareness of our true nature. When we increase the intersecting part of the Venn circles, we realize the fullness of Spirit that we embody until we recognize we are completely immersed in and by Spirit. There is no separation. We must remember our true nature as the image and likeness of God and to actually be the nature of God. That which causes us confusion or discontent is a consciousness of separation. And when we are living and acting as if we are separate, we feel little sense of gratitude because we have separated ourselves from or limit ourselves or parts of us from the eternal source. We're trying to squeeze our bounty from the wrong end of the cornucopia, the skinny end. We feel little fullness because we are operating from a smaller piece of the infinite pie. I'm off track just a little bit because I read this earlier this morning and I thought it was pretty fascinating. The planet Pluto is so far from the sun that it takes 248 years for it to make a complete orbit around the sun. So since the time it was discovered, I believe it was 1966, sometime in the 60s, it has only made 1/4 of an orbit around the sun. And it also rotates on its axis, one full rotation every 16.5 days. So if you're having a bad day,
Don't go to Pluto.
don't go to Pluto. Our level of thanksgiving is directly related to our openness to receive, and has absolutely nothing to do with the availability of our thanks. We are not only a part of the infinite God, we are a center of universal good. Universal good finds its center in you.
Love that, and I like the Pluto, but I also like that picture in my mind of that cornucopia. If you're trying to get all the gratitude and the good out of that little end, it's not working too well, but if you just go to that open end, there's the fullness of all that is. So be the life spirit, be the center of the life spirit. Don't jump on the bandwagon of complaints. Join the power of good. Because generally, when folks complain, they don't talk to the right person. And having a legitimate complaint means there is a problem or a challenge, which always has a solution. Many solutions, actually, and we get to choose from them. So when we share a complaint, first it should be to the one or ones who can make the difference. Then, as we share, we should have a well-planned out description of the problem with the details that support a resolution. Wayne Dyer wrote, "Conflict cannot survive without your participation." And I remember when my kids were little and they would come to me with their complaints about each other, I would say, "It only takes one of you." And now as adults, they have learned how very, very true that is. There are sometimes we have to go like this, sometimes we have to just pause, and sometimes we can share in that moment, but always sharing eventually, because conflict cannot survive without your participation. So some of that patience that I was talking about that we have to have with ourselves and with others must be applied for us to be able to stay the course of peace in a discussion. Because sometimes you can agree to enter into a discussion with someone, but then it escalates again. And you have to be patient and remember to bring it back down to the level of honest, sincere compassion and understanding. Often complainers aren't looking for a solution, so keeping the focus on a resolution or looking at resolutions is important. And this is true if you're the head of a company, it's true if you are just engaged with another human being. When and if you notice yourself complaining, the same tool can be used, making the U-turn from complaint to a positive thought process. And it's important to remember that every possible resolution is available in the allness that Spirit is. And therefore, you already have access to it. Now, we sometimes hear people say, I just don't know what to do. Or there's this thing going on and it just doesn't have any fix. Never true. The allness of Spirit is ever present and every possibility of resolution is available. And we get to choose from that. Norman Vincent Peale wrote, dwelling on negative thoughts is like fertilizing weeds. And we all know that Charlie Brown was right when he said, worrying won't stop the bad stuff from happening. It just stops you enjoying the good.
Yeah, so making a U-turn is about not habitually looking back when things get challenging. It's about taking the trash out of the curb and letting it go. Don't look back. You're not going that way. Turn around from the conflict and enter into the good life and keep moving in that direction. Thomas Troward, this is my favorite Thomas Troward quote, I think. Could be. I don't know. He says a lot, so this may not be my favorite, but it's pretty close. He says, my mind is the center of divine operation. Divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression, and this means the production of something beyond what has gone before. Something entirely new, not included in past experiences, though proceeding out of it. In my own special world of which I am the center, it moves forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have gone before. So I'm releasing the past, moving forward into the greater life, into the greater expansion of this life that I'm living.
And realizing that in God every possibility exists. So Maya Angelou tells a story about how she learned to overcome the engagement of complaining. And she says that when she was age 3 to age 7, she lived with her grandmother, who provided a calm stability during what was otherwise a traumatic childhood. Her grandmother happened to run a general store, and she got riled by people's complaints. She said nothing because she needed those customers, but she was riled by them, and so she used that opportunity to teach Maya a valuable lesson. They'd come in complaining, and one day it would be because it was too hot, and one day because it was too cold, and she said there were a myriad of other issues that people would come to her with. And her grandmother thought they were trivial. So after the customer would leave, she would call Maya over to her and say, Sister, did you hear what brother so-and-so or sister much-to-do complained about? Sister, there are people who went to sleep all over the world last night, poor and rich, white and black, but they will never wake up again. And those dead folks would give anything, for just 5 minutes of this weather that person was grumbling about. So you watch yourself about complaining, sister. What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. And if you can't change it, then change the way you think about it. Don't complain. Powerful teaching at a young age, isn't it? Gary Zukav wrote, an individual who does not understand why his life is painful instead of joyful is like a farmer who does not understand why barley is growing in his field instead of lettuce. He is not aware of the seeds that he has planted. And likewise, when we are complaining or engaging in complaints, we are not aware of the seeds that we are planting. We must make that U-turn, step into awareness. You do have the power to be grateful, and remember, you are a concentration of life spirit here on earth, not on Pluto, on earth. And so it is.
So it is.